Over the last 8 years of posting videos on this channel, I've liked to keep it just about the watches. Yet as many of you know, I also enjoy periodically releasing content around the business side of the industry. And at the moment, there is no topic more top of mind in this regard than tariffs. I won't mince words. If we reach the point after this 90-day pause where they take full effect, it could be devastating for the watch industry. Despite knowing that this is a constantly moving target, in this video, we will examine the current status of these tariffs as they pertain to the watch industry. In doing so, we will break this down into the following parts. Part 1, the current status. What happened and what this tariff development entails for watches. Part 2 is the added cost. Here we provide examples of how these tariffs will impact the cost of doing business and ultimately hurt US consumers. For the third section, we'll look at the international reliance on parts and how the US watch industry is not in a position to sustain itself or grow without the support of international partners. In the fourth section, we have the watchmaking labor paradox. This is where we'll discuss the watchmaker shortage that already exists in the United States and the interesting dilemma of training these artisans here as well. Part 5 is the secondary market reaction and how this can impact the pre-owned dealers and collectors. And Part 6, a look forward. This is where we'll explain why tariffs can halt investment into the US for our industry and offer some final thoughts. Given the nature of the subject, I know we're walking a delicate edge here, but I do not want to make this a politically charged video. Instead, I just want to discuss the economic impact on the industry, providing my perspective as both a watch enthusiast and a business owner in this space. So with that being the case, let's keep it civil and also classy in the comments. On April 2nd, 2025, I was in Geneva, Switzerland at the largest trade show in the industry known as Watches and Wonders. This show is a spectacle where many of the largest names in watchmaking unveil their new products for the year, attended by press, retailers, and brands. It was day 2 of the show, so the momentum of covering what was new for dozens of participating brands was in full swing. However, as soon as the news broke regarding the tariffs, the discourse on the ground rapidly changed. As I walked through the halls, I could overhear conversations shift in real time from joyful productivity to being fueled by anxiety, recognizing the difficulty that comes with this tariff implementation. Most of the brands that dominate the mechanical watch industry come from 3 countries: Germany, Japan, and of course, Switzerland. On this day, these 3 countries were introduced to new additional tariff rates, with the EU facing 20%, Japan 24%, and Switzerland a whopping 31%. Let's begin by giving some context to these numbers. Mechanical watches imported into the United States are generally subjected to duties, where the broader watch parts like the case, strap, and movement are provided a harmonized tariff schedule or HTS codes, with the final cost of importing that watch depending on a variety of factors. Before this new policy, duties on watches would range from approximately 3 to 8% depending on the materials and country of origin. At the moment of recording this video, Trump did put a 90-day pause on the higher tariff rates, but has since implemented a 10% flat rate for nations mentioned above, which is still higher compared to normal. If this 31% rate is realized for Switzerland, this could be disastrous. It is also important to recognize that the United States is now the largest export market for watches for many countries, especially Switzerland, overtaking China as the leading export market as of 2024. According to Morgan Stanley and Lux Consult's annual report of the Swiss watch industry, the United States is responsible for importing 16.9% of total Swiss watch exports compared to China's 15.9% in second place. The United States is also experiencing rapid growth in this regard, with considerable potential for further development in the years to come. The report highlights how the US is underpenetrated compared to other competing markets. As quoted in the same report, we estimate that while spend per capita on Swiss watches stood at $45 in France and $67 in the UK in 2024, it stood at only $28 in the United States. In other words, brands were actively looking to the US as a growth market to invest in, resulting in substantial job growth and billions of dollars in commercial activity happening every year. Now let's get a bit more specific and paint a few scenarios of how this could impact those in the industry, especially those who live in the United States. So my business can import watches in two primary ways as an authorized dealer. First, it can be directly from a brand where we will be bringing in watches from overseas and have to import them, going through the customs process ourselves. This is typically the case for smaller brands that lack distribution capabilities or have limited points of sale in the US. For larger brands that are typically part of major luxury groups, they will have distribution centers in the United States that are responsible for importing the products and then facilitating orders with retailers across the country. Regardless of whether the watches are imported directly or not, the fact remains that these new tariffs will need to be absorbed by every part of the chain. Let's use an example of a Swiss watch that was imported and has a wholesale price of $1,000. This watch will be subjected to multiple HTS code rates broken down by the strap, case, and movement. Let's say on average for this example, the duties paid before the Trump tariffs were 6%. This would lead to a total cost at import of $1,060. However, with the additional 31% added on top, the new adjusted rate of this tariff would result in a cost of $1,370 to import the same watch. That might not seem like a big shift, however, this is a massive swing, especially considering that margins in watches are not nearly as large as some think. The likely outcome, which I am already seeing come into motion, is that brands, retailers, and consumers all will need to absorb part of this added cost. This issue is further exacerbated for brands that don't already have sufficient stock in the States. Now let's look at another scenario, how this can also impact you as a collector if you want to buy a brand that doesn't have significant physical distribution in the United States. Maybe like Christopher Ward, who has drastically scaled in recent years, or even smaller players that operate and fulfill products from foreign countries. Although it will again vary depending on the country of origin, the important fact here is that if you are buying directly, you as the individual are the one importing the goods, and your tariff is calculated based on the purchase price usually listed on the receipt of the customs paperwork, not the wholesale cost. So instead of having a distribution center handle this, a collector is on the hook for the full retail value of that product, which is a lot to deal with and will likely be enough to dissuade them from purchasing. Some might mention, why not just have the brand mark the watch as being worth a lot less? This is not wise for a company, as this would impact insurance coverage for that product. Therefore, if the international shipment gets lost, which as you can imagine does happen, you will be taking a significant risk, especially if it occurs multiple times or for a luxury watch that costs thousands of dollars. This added duty not only hurts the brands, but also hurts collectors who are looking to buy something that can only be obtained internationally, as they will have to bear the cost of supporting a maker. Now, some might argue that this is the main reason, or one of the main reasons, why these tariffs were introduced. Citizens in the United States will now be incentivized to buy from US-based watch companies. Well, unfortunately, it's not that simple. A few key points to understand about the US are that yes, it was once a hub for watchmaking in the 19th and early 20th centuries, but since then the US has dramatically lost market share. By the 1970s, when quartz watchmaking took over, American watch brands began to shudder as they were disrupted by the new innovative quartz technology that was much easier to manufacture. These skilled watchmaking trades were abandoned, and brands either closed their doors or relocated production overseas as the nation's infrastructure withered for the trade. This period was known as the Quartz Crisis, and it was responsible not only for one of the leading causes of the decimation of the American watchmaking industry, but also the Swiss watchmaking industry, which was cut by more than half its size from the 1970s to the 1980s. The US shifted its focus elsewhere, abandoning mechanical watchmaking. In contrast, nations like Japan continued to develop quartz technology, while Switzerland hung on by a thread, given that watches were too crucial of an export to fully abandon, although it was a brutally difficult time for the Swiss. That perseverance paid off for Switzerland, as we have now seen a resurgence of interest in mechanical watchmaking among collectors who appreciate the artistry, self-expression, and the luxury that comes with select purchases. Yet even with this being the case, the US was likely not wrong for giving up on mechanical watchmaking in this period, as it was followed by extreme expansion in technology, which has become an invaluable export for fueling our economy. It is also crucial to note the significant difference between the standard for Swiss made and made in the USA. For a watch to qualify to be Swiss made, quote, at least 60% of the production cost of a watch taken as a whole must be Swiss based, whereas the FTC is much stricter, stating for a product to be called made in the USA or claimed to be of domestic origin without qualifications or limits on the claim, the product must be all or virtually all made in the US. To put it simply, the infrastructure to make a made in the USA watch is not here to do it at scale. There are some small brands in the US that are producing watches on varying levels, but the ones that are constructing the majority of the parts in the States are doing things at a much more bespoke level, such as Josh Shapiro in Los Angeles, who is producing well under 100 watches a year, or Roland Murphy in Lancaster, PA, that has a similar output for his in-house calibers, which will still rely on select parts from overseas. For the vast majority of small brands in the United States, they are using mostly imported parts from other countries, as we do not have the machinery or existing expertise to produce these ultra-specific components like hairsprings and other small parts of a movement. Movements are the real trouble spot, as even for a simple mechanical caliber, you're talking about many dozens of finely crafted components, which become even more complex from there. In Switzerland, you have many different movement suppliers, such as Eda, Solida, La Joux-Perret, Soprod, and Ronda. In Japan, you have Seiko Instruments and Miyota, and in China, you have many manufacturers as well, such as Siegel for movements, with the nation also being a leading manufacturer of cases and bracelets for brands. It's also important to add, with these extreme tariffs being placed on China, which are even crazier than Switzerland, it only adds to the looming challenges brand owners in the United States face. The point here is that without these external suppliers, entrepreneurs in the United States operating smaller brands can't produce watches. And these added costs for importing parts adds a burden to American job creators that will leave them no choice but to pass along the cost to American consumers, making them less competitive as a result. Some might also suggest that goods could be first sent to a place like Canada, where then they could be imported into the United States. We must remember, though, that these tariffs are based on the country of origin, not the last stop in the logistical process. This reality of importing from other countries to produce watches was also a challenge faced by President Trump, as his golden tourbillon watch utilizes a movement produced by a Swiss watchmaker. In his more attainable Trump Victory Dive watches, he relied on the venerable NH35, a great entry-level mechanical movement, but it is produced by Seiko Instruments from Japan. As someone who has been inside dozens of Swiss, German, and Japanese watchmaking manufacturers, assembly workshops, and factories for specialized parts, most are dramatically underestimating how much it would take to get the US back to being a watchmaking titan. And even if we did have it as a desire, working with other countries would not be an issue. Instead, it would be paramount for continued industry prosperity. For those that want to see how the math of this would look for a small business, I will link in the description to Mark from Long Island Watch's video where he talks about this and outlines the new added cost for him with these tariffs to import parts overseas to make his watches. Just for one order, it cost him additional tens of thousands of dollars, and he did a phenomenal job breaking this down. It's a sobering video on how this directly impacts entrepreneurs in the United States. I would imagine the next argument some might have is that this is why we need to begin building back our industry of trained watchmakers in the United States, so we're less reliant on other countries. Well, as much as I would love to see it happen, that is another loaded topic. There are two problems with this idea of scaling watchmaking labor in the US. First, we would need to discuss the tens of billions of dollars in investment that would make this a reality. However, this is actually not even the biggest problem facing the US in solving this issue, as we are already in a dire watchmaking shortage. In an article written by Watches of Espionage, they quote Jordan Ficklin, a watchmaker and former executive director of the American Watchmakers and Clockmakers Institute, the AWCI. Ficklin stated, "Today there are an estimated 4,000 watchmakers in the United States, a decrease as much as 90% compared to the 1960s. To put 4,000 into context, consider that if you were to add the professional athletes from the four major sports leagues in the US, the NBA, NFL, NHL, and MLB, you would have roughly 4,000 4,104 active players. And yes, I know some of these teams are in Canada. In any case, the fact remains you are more likely to encounter a professional athlete from these leagues than to walk into a trained US watchmaker. The United States also imports a substantial amount of watches, accounting for approximately 16.9% of total Swiss watch exports in 2024, or roughly 2.58 million units just last year. And this doesn't include the watches coming from Japan, Germany, China, France, the UK, and many other countries that US customers are buying. Keep in mind as well that the majority of these 4,000 watchmakers today are not constructing new watches. They are servicing already imported ones from over the years. A demand that cannot be met, resulting in months of waiting for service and frequent shipment of watches overseas, as the labor force required for this skilled trade is not available in the necessary quantity. Now, we should be training more people as watchmakers in the United States, as it is a well-paying field with tremendous job stability, and there is a dire need. The problem is that this would take decades to get right, and these tariffs affect those who are aiming to make this a reality. One of the most well-regarded international programs for learning watchmaking is WOSTEP, or the Watchmakers of Switzerland Training and Educational Program. To become a professional watchmaker, it is a rigorous process to do it at an elevated level. WOSTEP offers a variety of courses with varying levels of involvement, all of which are serious undertakings that require commitment. Their popular 3,000-hour course, which is a full-time 2-year program, produces graduates in the hundreds for each class, not tens of thousands. What makes matters more complicated with these tariffs is that the schools in the United States that either offer WOSTEP accredited programs or other classes on the trade are not in tremendous supply. Some of the famous schools for watchmaking in the US include the Nicholas G. Hayek Watchmaking School in Miami, the North American Institute of Swiss Watchmaking in Fort Worth, Texas, and the Lititz Watch Technicum in Pennsylvania. The conundrum with examples like these is who owns the educational institutions. The Hayek School is owned by a watchmaking conglomerate, a Swiss one at that, the Swatch Group. The North American Institute of Swiss Watchmaking was established in partnership between two organizations, WOSTEP and Richemont, the second largest luxury group in the world, based in Switzerland. And finally, Lititz was created by the Swiss watchmaking king Rolex back in 2001 as a way to address this watchmaking shortage. Rolex also recently opened another watchmaking training center available exclusively to US citizens in Dallas, Texas in 2023. This marked a massive multi-million-dollar investment by the brand to train and source new watchmakers for the company and its affiliates in the United States. According to the website, not only is tuition free, but students also receive a monthly stipend of $1,800 to help offset cost of living expenses, allowing them to engage in the program full time. With the course's final exam taking place in Geneva, Switzerland, and all the expenses for this trip are covered by RWTC as well. You likely recognize a dilemma here, as bringing back jobs is commonly cited as a primary benefit of tariffs. Yet in the case of the watch industry, it is international brands that are leading the charge in investing in American workers, the same names that will be among the largest stakeholders impacted by the tariffs. Make no mistake, there are also US organizations that invest in training new watchmakers, such as the previously mentioned AWCI and another notable organization, the Veterans Watchmaking Initiative. This organization carries the torch in the 21st century of the original concept of the Joseph Bulova School, which was established after World War II to teach disabled veterans the craft of watchmaking. The VWI continues this legacy, helping disabled veterans find a path to future employment in the trade. And if you do have the funds to support them, I know that they would greatly appreciate it. I can link to that in the description down below. The unfortunate reality is that there is no guarantee that all of the curriculum materials that will need to be imported won't be tariff exempt. Given that we no longer have the ability to create small parts in the US, watchmakers rely on ordering parts from overseas to complete work for clients, adding cost to watchmakers that graduate from places like the VWI and US citizens that are looking to get this work done, oftentimes being on watches that are family heirlooms with tremendous sentimental value. Pre-owned watch dealers based in the United States are not insular. They rely on a global network to source products for customers both domestically and internationally. With the newly introduced tariffs, fewer products will become available for two primary reasons if this continues. One, there will likely be fewer imported new watches coming into the States as brands take a wait and see approach to what happens with these tariffs. And more significantly, dealers will also have to rely solely on the supply in the United States to sell, given that they will struggle to import goods from international sources and still make a profit, especially since the tariffs are based on the country of origin. If the tariffs persist in the medium to long term, you can expect supply to shrink, resulting in less inventory on the market, and prices are likely to rise as a consequence. This would be especially true for rarer vintage watches, where a capped supply globally exists, given that they are no longer in production. Additionally, dealers are not the only ones transacting in vintage watches, as this will also affect collectors who now have to contend with additional tariffs, likely pricing them out of purchasing examples from other countries. This situation is incredibly complex to say the least, and has the entire industry waiting to see what unfolds. Now, unlike other industries, watchmaking is a global landscape. Its success depends on countries working together, and trade deficits are not a relevant target for trying to level the playing field. These brands avoid making decisions based on the short term. Instead, they think in decades, if not centuries, to maintain their brand image. But given how much has changed so quickly, it's creating a different way to operate for many of the brands in this space. The challenge above all else is that the US is an area of tremendous growth for this industry, which will attract billions of dollars in investment in the years to come, with thousands of jobs relying on healthy international relations. Now, although I'm on a smaller scale, I do employ 30 people in the US in this industry. And just last year, we made significant investments to open our first retail store in my hometown in Cleveland, Ohio, and substantially grew our content team as well. I have no intention of slowing down, as I am married to this industry for the long run, and I love what I do. That said, I can't speak for everyone in that regard, and it is impossible to ignore how these tariffs, if fully realized, could have devastating outcomes. Now, I recognize in the grand scheme, watches are far from needed items. I recognize where they're at in the pecking order of all things that matter in life. Nevertheless, this is a multi-billion-dollar industry that brings enjoyment to people all across the United States and beyond, and employs thousands and thousands of people. I don't want to be a whiner or be hyperbolic about this situation. My hope is that we can look back on this video in the years to come, and that most of the problems I am documenting will never be realized. Again, I really do love what I do, and I don't want to see anybody in this industry get hurt. I want longevity for all those involved. I want watch collectors to be able to buy watches at reasonable prices and to be able to enjoy what they love on a day-to-day basis. I don't know what will come with this, but I just wanted to be able to document this story in the best way that I knew I could in talking about it to all of you to camera. But all right, guys, that is my take on the tariff situation and how it impacts the watch industry. I know this was a long one, a lot to break down, and I know I'm threading a needle here, trying not to be political about this, and I really don't. I wanted to keep this about the facts and really speaking about how this could impact people, us as collectors and business owners. If you guys did enjoy this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe, hit the bell icon, really do appreciate that. Feel free to leave some comments down below. I do think this is an important topic to discuss. If you are going to do that though, please just be civil, be adults, and try to be respectful to other people and the variety of opinions that obviously are going to be involving this topic. So thank you guys so much for watching, be well, and I will see you all very soon.